there's one thing that really pisses me off every time I speak Spanish on the internet, it's people trying to teach me the politically correct way to speak it. Hi y'all, SnarkyJay cosplay here. I'm making this video as a bit of a follow-up to a video I put out last week about representation and how representation in Hollywood is actually Hollywood's biggest lie. You can go and check that one out if you want to. However, I had a bunch of people making comments, and most of them I think were joking, about why it is that when I speak about Hispanics and Latinos or Latinas, I don't use the word Latinx. Now, if you haven't heard the term Latinx, you're one of the fortunate few. Latinx is a relatively new term, and essentially, it is the new politically correct way to say Latino or Latina. Because in today's culture, using a language that is inherently gendered is apparently incorrect. Now, if you're not super familiar with Spanish, let me give you a quick lesson. So everything in Spanish is essentially gendered. A table is la mesa because it's femenina. La is also a feminine term. You would say el libro, which means the book. El is he, or the in this case, and libro ends in O because it's a masculine term. So mesa and libro are female and male, even though they're not human, right? And they have no sex/gender. That's just the way the Spanish language works. There is not an alternate way to say table and book where it wouldn't be gendered. That's just the way the Spanish language works. And quite frankly, it's been inoffensive for thousands of years until recently. So we have folks now trying to say Latinx so that they don't have to call you or anything Latino or Latina. They want to de-gender the language so that it's more inclusive to folks of different gender identities. I think that's great. We should all be super inclusive, and we can be, quite frankly, as inclusive as we'd like to be, as long as we stop trying to teach Hispanic and Latin people how to fucking speak their language. The Spanish language has sat untouched and uninfluenced for thousands of years. There are tons of different dialects. I'm Cuban Puerto Rican, and both of those Spanishes are different. I tried dating a Chilean man once, and I could barely understand what the f he was saying. I've got a friend in Spain who's a great crafter, and I once told him he's un bárbaro, which to Cuban people means like you're a fucking champ. That's crazy. But literally it means you're a barbarian, and he was borderline offended until I explained that I'm Cuban, and this is the context in which I meant it. So we're a beautiful melting pot of various dialects and cultures. That's what being Hispanic, Latino, Latina is all about. It's not about having white people come and tell us that our language is non-inclusive. Now, I did do some research about Latinx to try to understand where it came from, and there really isn't an easy way to pinpoint where exactly it came from, but I can tell you, as somebody who speaks Spanish on a daily basis, I speak Spanish at home with my family, and I basically grew up speaking Spanish. I personally have never encountered a single person in my city that was willing to use the word Latinx or accept it as an acceptable term.
I feel like if you use it,
the part that I find amusing is that I'm being told that Latinx is the correct term by people that are neither Hispanic nor Latino or Latina. And I want to point something out here. We've had a cultural shift historically where now instead of praising colonizers, we instead shed light on the things that they've done, right? The Spaniards were dedicated colonizers, prolific colonizers, and for that reason there's so much Spanish from Spain specifically blood running through my veins, because they made great strides to lay roots. Now, in case you're unaware of the history of colonization, Puerto Rico was not filled with Spanish-speaking people. We had Taínos and other natives who essentially had their own language. The same happened in Cuba, and when the Spaniards came in and brought their own languages and stuff like that, essentially the same thing happened over there that happened here in the States. They changed the dynamics of the population through various different methods, but the people that were left alive basically got taught to speak Spanish. I find it fascinating how a society that now so vehemently attacks colonialism and colonialists and is so ashamed by the idea that colonizers could have taken somebody else's land and forced them to speak a different language, which I'm not saying is justifiable at all. But I mean, if you think that's really wrong, what is the difference between Spanish colonizers telling Taínos that they were speaking a language wrong and a bunch of white people on Twitter telling me that I'm speaking the languages my people incorrectly because somehow it's not
wrong
inclusive?
though, because
And I also would like to point out that in trying to make our language more inclusive, they have also made it that much more difficult to say because the X sound in Latinx is not really something we use in Spanish. Latinx.
Yeah, you don't.
I've never heard anybody in Spanish say Latinx. So at the end of the fucking day, not only have you come and bastardized our language, but you've also...
All right, that's a good video. She made her point. Anything you want to add? Latinx, Juan.
Oh, no, don't say that. I don't know, like, what's your opinion? Like, honestly speaking, like, would you imagine, like, trying to call somebody, like, you know, Latinx?
Not at all, man.
That's Latinx. I mean, what the concept is to take out the whole Latino or Latina, but that's just, it sounds
yeah.
Guys, don't call your Spanish friends or your Spanish families that you know Latinx because they're gonna get confused. It sounds off. That's a no. My opinion.
Vlogs Calvo and Antonio out.
Have a good night, guys. Give us some comments and buenas noches.
Take care, guys.
Take care.